Hi, if you like the video, please remember to subscribe. Hi everybody, I've been shooting with my Canon 600d T3i dSLR for over a year now, so I thought it might be a good time to share the way I set up my camera for everyday shooting, kind of like a beginner's guide to setting up your 600d T3i. And so, so if you've just got a 600D or a T3i and want a little bit of help with it to know how you might want to set it up to get consistent results for general kind of walk around outside photography where you're handheld, or maybe if you're thinking about buying a 600D or a T3i, this will kind of give you a flavour of what it's like to use the camera as well. One of the reasons we buy DSLRs is the complete technical and artistic freedom this type of camera gives us. So what I'll be doing hopefully over the next few months is covering different kind of setups for different situations, because it's undoubtedly you do get better results if you set up your camera to suit the type of photography you're going to be doing. So I'll be doing videos about landscapes, interiors, portrait photography, kids photography, maybe studio photography, night photography, and maybe a little bit of astrophotography too. But today's video is all about a general setup for walk around photography. So let's get started. If you haven't already, what you want to do is grab your owner's manual, a large cup of coffee, and slowly read through it. It's one of the best resources you'll have about learning about the capabilities of your camera and how you get the best out of it in different kind of situations. I always keep mine in the back of my camera bag as well, so whenever I get a spare 5 minutes, when you're in a journey somewhere, say on public transport, I can get it out and I can have a read of it. And it's also a really good place to kind of keep your flash gels nice and flat as well. So let's start with the real basics if you don't know this already. So on the bottom of the 600D T3i, honestly, there's the battery. So make sure your battery's charged up. Pop it in the camera. It only goes in correctly one way. Snap it down. SD card. If you haven't got one of these, you'll need one of these already. I go with the 32GB Extreme from SanDisk. Again, just pop that into there like that. You'll want to format that in the card as well if it's a new one. Lens on. To put lenses on Canon cameras, basically it's a bayonet type mount, and on EFS lenses, which is like the kit lens you probably got with it, you see there's a little white marker there and a little white marker there, and you just put them together, turn it clockwise and click, just waggle it, make sure it's on, and to release it you press that button. If it's an EF lens, which is for the full frame cameras or the crop sensors, there's a little red dot and a red dot on the lens that you line up like so. We've got a lovely rear LCD screen on the 600D T3i that can flip around, so make sure you give that a clean. Back to the lens, actually, you want to make sure the autofocus switch is to autofocus, and you want the image stabilizer on, especially, well, if you're going more taking photographs handheld, you will as well. You've probably got a strap that you'll want to put on it as well. Now, but something that lots of people forget is the diopter, which is the little adjuster there for the viewfinder. So what you can do with that is, sorry, it's on that side. And what you do is you can look through, and don't look at what's in the distance. All you're concentrating on is turning that, is the little black dots, the little autofocus points, and just turn them until they look nice and sharp to you. Make sure you do adjust it, and it's always worth looking at it every now and again, because it easily gets knocked and can get changed, and it might, obviously when we're using autofocus it doesn't really matter, but if you don't need manual focus, you could miss focus because of that. Maybe the viewfinder might need a little bit of a clean, and for the purposes of this setup we're going to be running in aperture priority mode, which is AV on your mode dial, so just make sure you turn that to AV. Now what we want to do next is just check that card, so press the play button on the back of your camera, which is that little blue one down there, turn it on first, and see if there's any pictures on there that you haven't taken off already. If there are, take the card out, put it into your laptop or connect it using the USB lead, copy the pictures off. If you've already got them off and you're happy that they're all backed up and everything, obviously go into the menus and it's just menu, and it's the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's the first yellow spanner, and just click the format and format it while the card's in the camera. That'll save you the hassle. It's always best to format a card in the camera rather than on your laptop. You get less card error, any less card errors that way. I can't get my words out today. Now, the next thing we're going to do to set up the camera is we're going to use the quick menu, which is this really fantastically useful, if I turn the camera on, menu on the back of the screen. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to flip the webcam around now so you can see it, and we can go through the settings that I use for my general walk around photography. So on the back LCD of the camera, we've got a quick menu, which is going to give us access to almost all the settings we're going to need. So we're going to make sure, well, what we're going to do is we're going to go through them in order just to make sure we've got everything how we want it. And try and make this check part of your pre-shoot routine to make sure you haven't changed anything by mistake or left any different settings from the last time you've used the camera. To bring the quick menu up, just half press the shutter on top of the camera, and then to access it, you press the Q button just there. When you press it, you'll see the settings become highlighted, and you can move through them using the directional pad left and right here. Not up and down, just left and right. Now, if you want to change anything, you can just use the command dial on top. You can just turn that. I'm changing my f-stop there. However, if you press set to go into it, it will give you a little hint about the thing. So it says small f number, subject stands out, large f number, large depth of field. It's good, isn't it? And then we can press set, and then we can go to something else. So let's have a look, see what it says about ISO. ISO 100, you use that under clear skies and for bright scenes. ISO 6400 keeps images stable in dark scenes. Or ISO Auto, which we're going to use, automatically set ISO speed relative to subject and ambient brightness. So, as you can see, it's really handy, and you can learn stuff about how cameras work as you work through them as well. So what we're going to do is now let's go through them in order. So to start off with, we're in AV mode anyway, aren't we? We're in aperture priority mode to change the size of the hole in front of the camera. So press Q, start off F8. So again, this is the size of the hole in the front of our camera. F8 is a good starting point. There's a saying in photography, F8 and B there. If you wanted more of the scene in front and behind of our subject in focus, we could go to a higher F number, or we could go smaller. Now note there, see what I did there? As you change your zoom position on a cheaper zoom like this one, you actually change your aperture as well. So just watch out for that. So just because you're at f8 at this particular zoom, if you were to zoom, the aperture can change. Actually, sorry, though, the aperture, is it keeping the aperture? No, it's keeping the aperture changing, but the exposure's changing. You see the ISO there? So that's our aperture. So the next one is ISO. Ooh. Q. Now, auto ISO is fantastic. I love the fact that we have auto ISO on our Canon cameras now. On my 350D, you didn't. And what that means is it's going to keep an eye on the scene. And if it thinks your camera shutter speed is getting a little bit too low for handheld shooting, it will increase the ISO. Or if you run out of, if you need to make the scene brighter, and it will also then increase the ISO there. But the main reason why you use auto ISO is so that the camera will keep an eye on things and make sure you don't end up with lots of camera blur. So once we've done that bit, we then go to our exposure compensation. Now I'll talk about this in a minute, but basically we want that to be in the middle. If we turn it anti-clockwise, it goes to the left. That makes our photos darker. Turn it to the right, that will make our photos brighter. We want it in the middle. And if you go into it, you can do some more bracketing, but we're not going to talk about that in this video. We can adjust the flash level. Again, we're not going to talk about that video, so you don't need to worry about it. Leave it at 0. Our scene mode. Now, our scene mode, I just use standard. Used for general photography, creates sharp, vivid images. Nothing wrong with that. And then we've got auto correct image brightness. Again, I just leave that off. I'm pretty happy with the way that the camera captures things. And then you can normal flash firing. Again, we're not going to really go into advanced flash photography in this particular video, so you just leave that it is. Manual focus, that just reminds me to press the switch. So it's one shot focus. Again, I've done videos on different types of focusing systems, but basically if we go into that, we can do AI focus now, AI servo. So if you want to learn a little bit about them, just do a Google search or a YouTube search for those and they'll come up. We're going to go with one shot for the time being. Single shooting, again, because we're going to go around and when we press the shutter, what's going to happen is the camera is just going to fire one shot. But I guess, if you're out and about and all of a sudden there's something that's moving around, you could put it on continuous shooting and then you get something like this. But for all intents and purposes, the way that I walk around, I always have it on single. Because even on single shooting, you can shoot quite fast, by taking your finger on and off the exposure button, the shutter button. And then we've got evaluative metering, stick with that. RAW, now we want to be shooting in RAW. RAW gives us the most amount of data in our pictures. It gives us the most amount of elbow room in post-processing. It does mean you've got bigger files. It does mean you've got to use something like Aperture or Lightroom or Photoshop or Google's free Picasa. But it works very well. And a RAW file does need work, and you do have to increase the contrast and the sharpness and all that sort of stuff in post on your computer. But if there's a problem with exposure, with it being too bright or too dark or generally being a dull scene, RAW will help you bring it back. And that's it really. So if you've got those settings in your camera, f8, auto ISO, exposure compensation in the middle, standard color scene, auto white balance. I didn't talk about white balance, did I? Let's go back to auto white balance. Out and about, taking outside, auto white balance the camera will generally make the correct decision. I mean, if you wanted to warm things up a bit, you could always go to the shade, but I would say stick it in auto and you can't go wrong. So F8, auto ISO, exposure compensation in the middle, standard scene selection, auto white balance, shoot in RAW, auto focus, one shot with evaluative metering, and you can't go wrong. Now, there's one more little checklist that I want you to remember. And that checklist is the white. It's not the white, it's the wife checklist, okay? And now the wife checklist is very powerful. It makes sure, it gives you another way of checking that your camera is set up the way you want it. And so with the wife checklist, you just remember wife, because what it stands for is white balance. So is your white balance set to automatic or what you want? Now on the right hand side you'll see on the camera we've got white balance, autofocus, scene position and shooting mode. So we hit the white balance button, we want it in auto, there it is. ISO makes us check the ISO. Now we can press the ISO button on top of the camera and then we can go in. Is it on auto? Yes, so that's fine, let's set that. Focus, autofocus, are we in one shot? Yes. Have we got autofocus on our lens? Yes. Exposure, are we in aperture priority mode? Yes. Are we at f8? Yes. Is exposure compensation in the middle? Yes. Fantastic. So it's another way, another check. Often the first check actually whether your camera's okay. But remember, use in conjunction with this quick menu. This quick menu is your friend. It tells you exactly what to expect from your photos when you take them, because you can see aperture priority mode, you can see the aperture shooting at, your ISO to give you an indication of whether you're going to end up with blurred photos or not, your exposure compensation and your white balance, and you're shooting in RAW. So there we go. The wife checklist combined with a quick menu means that you will never, or very, very rarely, end up with photos you shouldn't have done because some setting on the camera was wrong. Okay, so that's enough of the settings. Let's imagine we're actually out on a photo walk now, bopping along. We've got a camera on. We're looking for interesting subjects. And we're probably going to be taking pictures of things like buildings, maybe some people, bit of street photography, all very sedate. There's nothing moving around too fast. We're not doing sports or anything like that. And the light is okay. So it's a typical nice day out taking photographs, hand holding our camera. Now obviously we're going to get a camera out. If you've got a lens hood like me, one of the things you can do, when you take it on and off, just flick the lens to manual focus so that you're not wrenching the autofocus around when you're switching it between its kind of off and then on position. So make sure your autofocus is on. Make sure I'm having trouble today, aren't I? Make sure your image stabilizer on is okay. Is your lens cap off? Does your lens look clean? Is the LCD clean? Can you look through the viewfinder? Happy day. So look, now let's turn the camera on, flick, and let's make sure our mode dial is to AV or aperture priority. You can have a quick look at the quick menu on the back, because the more you use the quick menu, the more you'll kind of, when you've changed something and haven't changed it back, like exposure compensation, which I'll talk about if I haven't talked about already, or one of the exposure modes, or the quality, or something like that, you'll look back to it and go, oh, that's wrong, and you'll dive into the quick menu by pressing the Q button, and you'll change it to what it should be. So, we've checked that, we're cool. So now it's general photography, but there's a nice building, we're going to take a picture over there. So yeah, we're going to go for an f8 aperture. It's a nice middle aperture. There's a saying in photography, f8 and B there. If you put it to f8, chances are you're going to get a nice photo with most things in focus as well. So we've rolled the dials and it's changed to f8. Put the camera to the eye, half press the shutter, and then with the subject in the middle, and you'll get that beep. There we go, beep. So that means that it's locked on. Keep the shutter halfway down, because that means that camera is now focused on that particular distance. And then we just want to recompose our subject. Generally, you don't want to always have your subject in the middle of a photograph. Do a Google search for rule of thirds or composition ideas. But generally, I know in this video I'm in the middle, but it would look more interesting if I was off to one side, maybe like that or like that. And you want to do that with your photo. So focus with the subject in the middle, but then recompose so that the subject is then up there, or there, keeping that button halfway pressed. Focus and recomposing. So you do that, and then when you're happy, have a good look around the frame, make sure there's no distractions, maybe alter the zoom if you have to. If you do alter the zoom though, remember you do have to focus again, because these lenses, the focus does change over the zoom range, and also the exposure will change because you'll be changing the aperture. But don't worry about that, just focus and recompose again, and then press the button halfway down, all the way down, boom, takes the shot. And then do the same again and move the camera that way, and then maybe do another one that way and another one that way. For each photo in digital, it doesn't really have any more cost, because you're not going to print them out or have them developed. You're just going to pick the ones you really, really like. So take as many as you like. I mean, don't put it in motor drive, and click away. If it's a picture of a building, you don't need to be going like this, do you? that would be silly, and it would give you loads and loads of stuff to go through. Just do it in single shot, but take several pictures of the same scene, just in case. You never know, there might be some distraction that you didn't notice, someone walking past or some rubbish, or you might have missed focus or something like that. Now, when you're looking through the viewfinder, what you want to do as well is there's a load of numbers along the bottom, and you just want to keep an eye on those. Generally speaking, because we're using auto ISO, the camera's going to look after us. But what you've got down the bottom, on the bottom left-hand side, you've got your shutter speed. In this case, I'm inside, so it's quite low. It's a 50th of a second. Then you've got your aperture, f8, which you put in. And the middle bit is whether you've dialed in any exposure compensation. And then you've got your ISO is the next number, 1600 at the moment, because I'm in. And then on the far right-hand side, we've got number 6, number 5, and 6. I think that tells you how many shots you've got left to go, is it? In your buffer. Yeah, that's quite clever, isn't it? I never noticed that before. It's funny, you learn things every day. And then the other button, the green light that pops up, that's your autofocus confirm. So keep an eye on those, because again, auto ISO looks after us, but say you went somewhere a little bit darker, you may well find your shutter speed starts to get a little bit too long. And the rule of thumb for shutter speed is that you don't want your shutter speed to fall below 1 over your focal length. So when you look on top of your zoom there, you'll see set 18 to 55. So if I'm shooting, I've zoomed to around about 35 millimeters. I don't want my shutter speed to go below, well, if there was a shutter speed of 1/35th, I don't want to go below that, but in reality I probably don't want to go below 1/50th. Even though image stabilization is probably going to look after us, because then what that could mean is there might be a little bit of camera shake at those particular speeds. If that does happen, and you do notice that you're creeping down to like a 25th of a second, or a 10th or something like that, then what you want to do is you want to open up the aperture. And you open up the aperture by rolling your command dial round to anti-clockwise, and you're looking for a smaller f number. The smaller numbers mean the bigger the hole that's in the front of the lens, letting the light in. More light in, then you can get away with a shorter shutter speed, which means you get less camera shake and subject movement. The other thing that we want to keep an eye out for is the ISO. Now, I just said that the ISO in this particular situation, if I was to shoot indoors with this particular lens at this particular setting, the ISO would have jumped up to ISO 1600, which means the photo would have been quite grainy. So again, that would be a situation where if you can, you would then open up the aperture to let more light in, so the camera can then reduce the ISO so that you don't end up with a grainy photo. Now, the problem often is that, okay, say I take a picture now at ISO 1600, but let's take something more interesting. There's some flowers there. That photo looks great on the back of the viewfinder. You look at that and you go, oh wow, they look really nice. And even if you zoom in using the plus buttons, gosh, yeah, I'm really, really chuffed with that. Don't have an amazing camera that can take amazing photos, even at ISO 1600. But trust me, when you get home and you take that ISO 1600 photo and you look at it on your laptop big, it won't look anywhere near as good. So avoid low shutter speeds and try and avoid high ISOs if you can. However, don't sweat it too much. All these things about different settings and high ISOs and low shutter speed, because the camera, with the settings we've put in, will really look after us. It really will. Basically, if you put the subject in the middle of your scene, half press the shutter, get the focus lock, and then recompose, chances are you're going to get a great looking photo. The most important thing is just to take lots of photos from different angles, get down low, get up high, lots of different subjects, play the numbers game. That's what photography is all about, taking lots and lots of different photos from different angles of different subjects, and your number of keepers will go up. I always talk about it, that scene in Austin Powers 2, is it? Where he's got the model in front of her, is it Ivana Humpalot or something like that? And he's kind of going, and taking lots and lots of photos, I'm out, throw me another one. That's what photography is like. You don't know when you take a photo, most of the time, that it's going to be a really good one, or even, half decent one. But by taking lots of photos, you increase the chances of that happening. And finally, all these checks and techniques, you might be thinking, I've got to check all these things. I've got to check the quick menu on the back of the screen. I've got to do the wife checklist. I've got to check the little figures at the bottom of my viewfinder when I'm taking a photo. You may be thinking, doesn't this slow you down? Well, it does to start off with, but pretty soon it becomes second nature. And then if there's a problem, you'll notice it straight away, and you'll be able to change it straight away, because there's nothing worse than getting home from a really nice location and finding that your shutter speed was too long, or your ISO was a little bit high, so everything was a little bit grainy. But if you just keep practicing these methods, you'll find it becomes second nature. You won't even think about it, and it won't slow your photography down one bit. So you may be thinking, this is all well and good, Rob, but at the moment we're not really controlling much with our camera, are we? We've put all these settings in, and all we're doing is pointing our camera at a subject, focusing, recomposing, taking the shot, and that's it. Where's the artistry in it? Where's our input? Well, apart from choosing the subject and the angle, this is why we're shooting in AV mode, or aperture priority mode. And the aperture is the size of the hole on the front of your camera, but it doesn't just control the amount of light that comes in, it also controls something called the depth of field. And your depth of field is how much of a particular scene is in focus, behind and in front of what you've chosen to focus on. So, for example, at the moment with this Logitech C920 webcam that I'm doing this video with, I'm in focus, and pretty much quite a lot's in focus behind me, because the webcam has a very small aperture. It's probably, compared to the size of the sensor, it's probably like an f8 or something like that. So lots of the scene is in focus, and that's why we start off taking lots of photos at f8, because it means that no matter what we focus on the scene, pretty much most of it's going to be in focus. But when we want to get a little bit artistic, you might only want a little thing in focus. You know, we all seen those portrait shots of people where you have a nice beautiful subject and the background's nice and blurred, or you know, you go the typical learning shot is with a washing line with some pegs on, and you have a couple of pegs in the middle that are in focus and everything's nice and blurred, and this is all controlled. A large part of this is controlled through the control of aperture. So let's first think about blurring the background. So if we want to go out and blur the background of something, say, I don't know, say there's a we're out and about and there's a building, and then there's a statue in front of the building. Okay, typical scene, and we just want really the statue to be nice and in focus, but we want the building in the background to blur slightly. When we're in aperture priority mode, one of the ways that we can control this, and I stress this, only one of the ways, is by changing the aperture. And what you do is you make the aperture smaller. And you do that, as we said before, by rolling your command dial, the one on the top, anti-clockwise, and go for the smallest number you can. In this case, I've gone down to f3.5, and that will help. That's how you control it. However, in reality, aperture only plays part of the role in reducing your depth of field. The other thing you would do, and you probably do this first actually, is if you want to make the background blurred of something, if you can, if it's a person, move them away from the background so it's further away. Really, really important. The next thing you want to do is the closer you get to the subject, it means that the background is relatively further away, so it'll be more blurred. But probably the most important thing is to zoom in a bit. You know, if you use a longer focal length, it appears that your depth of field is changing. In reality, what's happening is the background is actually coming closer, and because it's a little bit blurred anyway, the blur is bigger, but you don't have to worry about it. So, for example, me, if there was this situation where there was a statue and I wanted to blur the background, what I would do, first thing I would do would be to zoom in. I might even put a longer lens on, and then I would change my location so I get the composition I want, and I would go down to a low f-stop as well, like f3.5, or actually with this lens I think when it's zoomed all the way it's f5.6, and that would control the depth of field. Now let's talk about it the other way. Let's say there's this statue with a lovely building behind it, and I want both of them in focus. What do I do then? Well, then you would go to a tighter aperture, but again, aperture it doesn't play, it plays part of the process. The other thing you'd want to do is, if you want lots of the scene in focus, you know, get back a little bit, go to a wide angle, so a short focal length, and then you would go to something like f8 or f16, or in extreme cases f22, but there's good reason to avoid f22 and just kind of stay at about f16. And so let's go. So we go to a wide angle, we go up to f16 by turning our command dial clockwise. We're up at f16. I could focus on the statue, and chances are, when I take the photo, if I then review it by pressing the play button and then zooming in, almost all the scene will be in focus. Now, another rule of thumb, if you're in front of a scene and using a wide angle, part of your zoom, or a wide angle lens, and you're using a smaller aperture like f16, if you want everything to be in focus in that particular scene, all you need to do is look at the scene and figure out where about a third of the way into the scene would be in terms of distance, and focus on that bit, and then take your shot, and generally all of the scene will be in focus, because when you take a photo, that bit you're focusing on with the smaller aperture, a lot will be in focus in front of the camera, in front of the focus point, and loads will be in focus after the focus point as well. So there we go. That's how you control aperture in this sort of walk around photography, to control the depth of field of your photos. So we're bopping around, you know, we're taking lots of photos, we're controlling our depth of field, we get some nice photos with lots of things in focus, nice. And then we get some nice detail shots, maybe there's a nice flower bed with some nice roses, take some photos of those. We've done a short depth of field by zooming in and using a smaller aperture. Using a larger aperture, see, even I get confused. But then there's another statue. Where we're going, there's lots of statues. This statue is against the sky, and there's loads of detail in the statue. It looks really nice, and you go, oh yeah, I fancy some of this. Take a photo. You do a bit of chimping on the back of the screen, and wait a minute, he's just a silhouette against the bright sky. He's all black, and it was a white marble statue. I should have mentioned that earlier. And you go, oh, that's a bit crap, isn't it? Maybe the camera made a mistake. Let's do it again. Do it again, and he's still all black. Right, okay, this is where we have to, basically the camera's being fooled. The exposure system in the camera is looking at this big bright sky and going, wow, that's really, really bright, let's dim everything down. But unfortunately, that's also dimming our statue down, so we're not going to see any details. So what we need to do is we need to tell the camera to brighten up the whole image. Now the sky is going to get very bright, it may even blow out, so there's no detail in the sky, but our statue will have the details in it. We do that using exposure compensation. Really powerful tool, this. It's also a tool where, if you forget to reset it afterwards, can really spoil your day because you end up with all overexposed or underexposed photos. So the way we do it is the exposure compensation button is that little AV button there, and you press and hold that like that, and then you roll your command dial, and you might be able to see, I don't know, the little dot moving to the right if I move it clockwise, moving to the left if I move it anti-clockwise. In order to brighten up the photo, I'm just going to roll it until I get to the 1, and then I'm going to take a photo, and then I'm going to roll it to the 2 and take a photo there, and just look at them and see which one looks the best. Again, press play and zoom in to make sure you're getting the detail that you want. Now, when you're finished and you think, yes, that looks good, make sure you press the A/B button and roll it back to the middle, because this is a setting that your camera remembers. And even if you turn your camera off, you turn it back on again, if you've been using exposure compensation, it will still keep your photos very bright or very dark. So the other side of it could be where you're wandering around and there's a dark door, very dark door, big dark brown oak door with all this lovely detail on it. And you're like, oh, I like that detail, I'm going to take some photos of that. And you aim the camera at it and you take a picture of this dark door, and you look at you do a bit of chimping and you go, wait a minute, that's not dark, it's a lot brighter. Well, here we've got the same problem in reverse. So what's happening now is the camera's seeing this really dark door and saying, this is too dark, I need to brighten it all up again. So, but again, we need to then tell the camera using exposure compensation, press the AV button, move the button anti-clockwise and move it down to 1 or 2 or 3, take some test shots, do a bit of chimping, see what's on the back of the camera, and then move on. But again, always remember, get it back to 0. Exposure compensation really is incredibly powerful, and it will transform the way your photos look. But again, don't sweat it too much, don't worry too much, because we're shooting in RAW. When we get the photo back into Lightroom or Photoshop or Aperture or Picasa or the GIMP, RAW files have a lot of elbow room to change things in terms of exposure. So even if something may be on the back of the screen, maybe looks like there's not much detail in, you may well find when you get back home, especially if you've got something like Lightroom, you can really bring out the detail in shadows. Sometimes not quite the same in highlights, but you'd be surprised what you can do. So there we go. That's how you can deal with exposure problems when you're out and about with your 600d T3i. Aperture priority and auto ISO is a really great way for taking photographs, but we do have to be very careful when we move indoors, especially with Canon DSLRs, because we can run into situations where there simply isn't enough light for a handheld exposure, handheld photograph, even with auto ISO helping us out. And one of the things I missed from my Fujifilm S5700, which is a camera I owned several years ago, or still do, I just don't use it very much, was if you're in a situation where the exposure was getting too long, it would warn you in no uncertain terms. You would get this warning appear on the viewfinder, in the side of the viewfinder and on the screen on the back, that would say, whoa, wait a minute, this is, you're trying to take a photograph handheld at half a second, and you're going to get a blurry shot. But our DSLRs don't do that, and you can take a photo, and again, it can look great on the back of the screen. It might not look blurry, but when you get it home and you look at it on your big screen, you will see the camera blur. So this is where we have to be especially careful. As soon as you go inside or it starts getting darker, keep an eye on that ISO, you know, as it starts shooting up, because again, we don't really want to go, well, you don't really want to go above sort of 1600 really, if you want nice looking photos, especially of people. Anything above 800 and people's skin can start to get quite blotchy with different sort of colours. But I mean, it's okay to shoot up to 6400 in emergencies. But again, the photos can look very, very grainy. So if you go inside somewhere and it's well, inside in general, what you want to do is you want to open up your aperture all the way. So go to f3.5, or maybe if you've got a faster lens, 2.8 or 1.8, something like that. And as your ISO starts to go up as well, if it does start getting up too high, you know, you're going to have to pop open the flash, aren't you? You're going to have to start using flash. Now, I know flash photography can sometimes look a little bit rubbish. It can look a bit flat, but it's better than having a really blurry, grainy photograph when you get home. And this is a really good reason why you should get one of these. This is an external flash. This is a Yongnuo YN565EX. Very reasonably priced, fully automatic. So you can put one of these babies on your camera, and it's got a bounce and swivel head. It will work in fully automatic ETTL mode. So what that means is all you do is you carry on shooting the way that you were doing, and then you can just aim this off at a funny angle, and what it will do, it will then bounce the light off a ceiling, off walls or anything like that, and it will make your photos look very, very gentle. I will have to turn the beep off on this because it's a bit loud, isn't it? But yeah, so bear that in mind. Or obviously you can use a tripod or rest your camera on something. If you're in places like museums and galleries, though, often they don't like flash. They don't like pop-up flash. They don't always like cameras, to be honest. They definitely don't like tripods. So sometimes you'll just have to try and hold the camera as still as possible, or get up against a pillar or something and do it that way. So there we go. So when you get inside, really keep an eye on that shutter speed. Really keep an eye on that ISO. If you've got to use your pop-up flash in an emergency, you can press the buttons and it'll pop open. Or if you've got one of these, pop on an external flash and it will make a world of difference. So I hope this video has been useful. I think that shooting with your 600d T3i in aperture priority mode, AV mode, with auto ISO really is an easy way, and it's my preferred way of shooting with my 600D. It's simple. It lets me concentrate on subject and composition, and I think it's a great place to start if you want to get out of auto and program mode and you want to start taking artistic control of your photos and controlling depth of field with your aperture, and obviously things like focal length and subject distance is very, very important. And it's one of the ways that you can make your photos look different, and it's really one of the big ways why we buy a DSLR, because when if you've got a DSLR, right, and you want to make people go, wow, you've got a great camera there, and when it's all about technique, isn't it really? Take pictures of people, but never take pictures of people with the focal length of anything less than 55mm, if you're using the 18-55. If you've got a telephoto zoom, put that on and zoom in even further. Whack open your aperture to f3.5, 5.6, whatever the widest can be, and take photos of people then, and then you get the nice blurred background, because you can't do that with a compact camera, you can't do it with a mobile phone camera. It's only really cameras that have got nice big sensors and nice long lenses where you can get that look, and that's where people go, oh yeah, you've got a good camera. And we can do that very easily in aperture priority mode, and with the addition of auto ISO, that looks after us to make sure that our shutter speed doesn't get too long, so we don't end up with camera shake. So if you've enjoyed the video, please hit the thumbs up. If you've really enjoyed it, it would mean so much to me if you subscribe and share the video, and hopefully I'll see you again soon.